Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, it's my turn to shut up and your turn to ask me questions. Okay, so let me go through the questions quickly. Right, should conclusions be provided only when specifically asked for? The answer is this. The only time you provide conclusions or recommendations is when you're being asked for a report. Okay? When you're being asked for a report, you must always produce an introduction and a recommendation or conclusion at the end. Always. If you're being asked for a briefing paper, right, or a memo or anything else, you don't need to provide a conclusion, so don't do it because it takes time. Do we have to consider COVID when answering the tasks? Well, I'm not sure what you mean there, Sonu. Basically, if the question talks about COVID, then do, or something similar. There's been some kind of, pandemic and people can't go to work or whatever it is, then yes, but no, otherwise, generally, no. Any advice for people giving an ACCA exam for the first time, starting with SBL? Yeah, it's really different, to any exam that you will have sat before. Even those of you that have sat earlier ACCA exams, it's different to those. So if you've never sat an ACCA exam, be prepared to come to SBL with a completely fresh attitude, right? It's not about simply regurgitating stuff from the textbook and earning your marks. It is about state, explain, apply. And so, honestly, I would recommend you to spend lots and lots of time between now and the exam practicing questions, using the techniques that I share with you here and also in my answers in the June 23 mock, which you have access to. If technical requirements have 10 marks, professional skills have 4 marks, does that mean we need to write 7 points? No, it doesn't. You only need to write 5 points for 2 marks each. Okay? How do we approach critically assess or critically analyze questions? Basically, when you see the word critically, it means be critical of it. Don't keep saying this is wonderful, right? Say here's a weakness, or this is not clear, or more information should be provided. Okay, so say things that are critical rather than things which are, wow, this is fantastic. Can we assume information in the case given, or we need to restrict ourselves to information provided? No, don't assume anything, please. Okay, don't assume. There will be times, of course. Look, you need to draw conclusions, right? Conclusions are coming from your heads. They're not going to be in the case study, right? Those conclusions will not be in the question, but you need to draw those conclusions from the facts or information given in the question. Don't imagine information if it's not given or if it's not suggested. Right? Don't imagine it. Focus on the information given, draw your conclusions, make your recommendations, or whatever it is. Do your analysis based on that. How to frame the answers, especially where there are 3 or 4 models involved. Okay, now, I'm glad you mentioned models. The first thing to say is there is no obligation to use models in the SBL exam. I repeat, there is no obligation to use any models in the SBL exam. Okay? None. The models are there for you to use if you believe that using a particular model will help you to structure your answers well. All right? So, for example, if you say, look, if the question says, tell me about, the competitive threats. I mean, it's a bit simplistic, but imagine it says, tell me about the competitive threats. You say, well, you know what? I know a model which can help me analyze competitive threats. And you use Porter's 5 forces. You won't mention Porter's 5 forces, but you'll use each of Porter's 5 forces as a subheading, right? So you might say one of the threats is the threat of new entrants. That's a subheading, threat of new entrants. And you'll say something blah, blah, blah about threat of new entrants for this question. If there's a threat in the 5 forces which is not relevant to this question, don't mention it. And for goodness sake, don't start explaining Porter's five forces. Please don't do that. All right? It's up to you whether you use a model or not. The examiner does not require that you use one. All right? In fact, there was one student I had, I think he got 84 or 89%. He didn't use a single model the whole exam. Not one. But they are very useful. I'm not saying forget about them. They're very useful. I would recommend that you use them. Okay? But use them use them as a tool, not as your answer. You understand? They're a tool to help you to frame your answers, to structure your answers, to remind you of what you need to say. Okay, so someone said don't give a recommendation unless asked. I think I've already dealt with that. So only give a recommendation in a report, as I've already said. Should one invest time in reading relevant exhibits again in detail? Would that be wasteful? The whole point of spending 45 minutes on reading your exhibits and highlighting the key issues is so that you don't have to read them again and again and again while you're writing your answer. Yes, you may need to refer to them, all right? But you'll know which exhibit and you'll know where to refer because you'll have highlighted it. So do it once. Read the exhibits in detail, slowly, once, and then refer back to them later. It'll be much easier than reading all of them all over again every time you can't remember anything. All right? What if a question asks me for a specific theory and I don't know what you should do there? Well, I'm not sure I've ever heard of a question which asks for a specific theory. I've heard of, in fact, in this one, I've got suitability, feasibility, and acceptability. That's unusual, to be honest. The only other time I've seen theories or models being asked for is when the question says something like using an appropriate framework. All right, and there are a couple of frameworks that you could have used, but it doesn't ask for a specific one to be used. So it's very rare. In fact, I certainly can't remember ever seeing one where they say use theory X, for example. They don't. I've never seen an exam question which does that. Would it be difficult for a student not in English and hard to answer question? Any recommendation for students to overcome join English language courses before taking the SBL exam? Well, yes, obviously, anything. In fact, there are some approved learning providers, ACCA approved learning providers, who run English language courses. But as a general point, and this applies even to those whose first language is English, as a general point, when you're writing your answers to SBL, follow these rules. Number one, keep your sentences short. Don't make them long and complicated. You keep them short, you make fewer mistakes. All right? You keep them short, they're easier for the marker to understand. I've seen sentences which are three lines long. For goodness sake, by the time you get to the end of reading that sentence, you've forgotten what the student said at the beginning. Marker's going to get confused. Don't do that. Keep your sentences short, make 1 point in each sentence. That's it. And in that way, even if English isn't your first language, you find a way to communicate effectively with the marker. All right? You don't need long, complicated sentences. You don't need long, complicated words. Right? Keep your words simple. You're not trying to impress the marker. You're trying to earn marks. All right. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm not going to talk about models anymore. Do we need to know everything in SBL Kaplan textbook? For goodness sake, absolutely not. What you need to do, especially at this stage, is spend 100% of your time on sitting past exam papers. I repeat, 100% of your time on sitting past exam papers on the ACCA's computer-based exam platform. Okay, 100% of your time. So please, please, please do not sit there and start reading your textbooks. This is not an exam where you're going to be required to regurgitate what's in your textbook. The answer for the SBL exam is in no textbook. It's not there. The SBL examiner expects you to create, to craft, to develop your own answers based on the facts given, your knowledge, all right, your skills, your expertise, to craft an answer, a solution which answers the questions that the board of directors has, because you as a professional person will be required to do exactly that in the real world. That's what a professional person is. Someone on whom people rely for their expertise. You know, can you imagine you employ a consultant and you say, this is my problem, and the consultant says, yeah, hang on a sec, let me look at page 79 of my textbook. I'm sure it's in there. Your answer. It's not the way it works in the real world. But it's not the way it works in SBL either. All right? So don't waste your time these at this stage, especially on reading your textbook. Can you score 8 marks for 8 brief points? Yes, you can, if you can think of 8 brief points. Yeah, I suppose. Any tips for the last 2 weeks? I've given you the biggest tips. Lots and lots of past exam questions. The thing about SBL, ladies and gentlemen, is that every single exam covers pretty much the whole syllabus, right? You will get questions on technology, on fintech, on control systems, on corporate governance, on risk management, on stakeholders, on strategy, in pretty much every exam, right? It's not, I keep repeating, this is not like any other exam, because the examination is integrated. All of these are integrated. When you go in the real world, your board of directors isn't going to say, oh, by the way, I have a problem with my internal control system. Tell me, what does the textbook say about that? You're going to say, well, okay, forget the textbook. Here's your problem. Your data's being corrupted. Oh, dear. Now what happens? Well, what happens now is that your stakeholders are going to get upset with you. And what are the risks? Well, they could sue you. And what might happen then? Well, then you might lose money. What might happen? All of that is what the board of directors is expecting from you, right? That's what they're expecting, right? So that's why SBL questions and answers are integrated. So in my little silly example that I've just given you, I used internal control systems or weaknesses, right? Stakeholders and strategic risk, all combined in a very short, small example. In the SBL exam, it's like that, but a bit more complex. And that's why, in terms of tips, the best thing you can do is practice questions. You do 2 or 3 past exam papers under exam conditions, and you will cover the whole syllabus. But you need to do it under exam conditions. All right. So I think that's most of the questions. Answers are written in the first person only if a letter or an email is asked. For the rest, we write in the third person. Yeah, I suppose so. It's less important, really. If it's informal, you say I. But if it's more formal, perhaps we, or our. Okay. All right, so that's all I'm going to say. You'll be so relieved to hear that I'm now going to shut up. If anyone wants to actually say something, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to and say something.
Hi, Ashim. I don't think the platform has the capability for
fair enough.
attendees to unmute.
Fair enough.
But we just have 2 minutes left to the end of the session, so I'm just going to maybe leave that for you to share any last thoughts with the students as we bring this to a close.
Well, I hope that added value, ladies and gentlemen. I really do. Most of you are sitting SBL for the first time, and it's really important that you go in there, knowing what to expect. And what to expect is the unexpected, all right? It's something that you haven't done before. Okay, and so you please spend your time doing the past exam papers, and I wish you every success. And of course, would love it if you filled out the feedback forms. We are giving out feedback forms. Yes, Martin. Yeah. So I'd love it if you filled out the feedback forms. I'd love to know how we can add value to you going forward. But apart from that, yeah, so all that's left for me to say is the very best of luck. And thank you for taking the time, and I hope you got what you were hoping to get. Have a super day.
Thank you. Thanks, Hashim. Many thanks, everyone. That's all the time that we had for the session today, and we do need to bring it to a close now. And I hope you found today's session useful. So just a quick reminder that everyone who registered for this webinar will be getting an email tomorrow with details on how they can listen to it again. A big thank you to everyone who found time to attend this session. And on behalf of the rest of the team here at ACCA, it's goodbye from us and best of luck in your preparations for the exams.
Bye.